The champagne glass tilted in slow motion above Evangeline Thorne's head. She saw it happen. The crystal rim catching ballroom light, the golden liquid suspended for one impossible heartbeat before gravity claimed it. Cold champagne cascaded down her face, soaking through her carefully pinned hair, dripping onto the crimson silk of her maternity gown. Her hand moved instinctively to her swollen belly, 6 months of life growing inside her, trembling under her palm. Dashiell Copeland stood beside her, his arm draped with casual ownership around the woman in white, who'd just emptied the glass. He was smiling, that same charming smile he deployed in boardrooms and charity auctions, the smile that had convinced Eva he represented safety, normalcy, everything her previous life wasn't. The woman in white, Vivian Ashford, daughter of a hedge fund titan, laughed. Sharp and performative, the sound echoed across the marble floor of the Beverly Grand Hotel ballroom. 200 faces turned toward the spectacle. CEOs and politicians, old money and new influence, all of them holding champagne flutes and smartphones angled to capture every second of Eva's destruction. Some whispered, a few smiled. Most watched with the cold curiosity of people who'd never known consequence. Eva's throat constricted. Her eyes burned, not from the champagne but from the weight of their stares, the click of camera shutters, the awareness that her humiliation was being documented, archived, prepared for viral distribution. She'd left everything behind for this life, for stability, for respectability, for a man who'd promised her a world without violence. Now she stood alone, drenched in alcohol and mockery while her husband publicly claimed another woman. What Dashiell didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Evangeline Thorne hadn't always been Evangeline Thorne. 5 years ago, she'd been someone else entirely, married to someone else, a man she'd fled in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon because she couldn't bear the darkness that followed him like cologne. A man who'd never begged her to stay, never chased her, never even called. He'd simply disappeared from her life as if she'd never existed to him at all. Outside the hotel, 3 miles across Los Angeles, a notification lit up a computer screen in a corner office overlooking downtown. The video feed was crisp, the audio clear despite the ballroom's acoustics. A man in a dark suit watched the champagne drip from Eva's chin, watched her hand. Pressed protectively against her belly, watched 200 people do absolutely nothing. His expression remained perfectly controlled. Only his jaw tightened, a muscle jumping once beneath skin marked with ink that climbed from collar to jawline, the edge of a dragon rendered in traditional style, scales catching the office light. Soren Cade had spent 5 years respecting a choice, 5 years watching from a distance, ensuring safety without proximity, protecting without possession. He'd built an empire in that time, expanded operations across 3 states, earned a reputation that made grown men check exits when he entered rooms. But he'd never stopped monitoring the woman who'd left him, not because he wanted her back, because he'd promised himself in the silence of a penthouse apartment the day he'd found her goodbye letter, that she would always be safe, even if she never knew it was him keeping her that way. The video played on. Vivian handed the empty glass to a passing waiter, her sequined gown catching light like armor. When she spoke, her voice carried with practiced projection across the suddenly quiet ballroom. Oops, how clumsy of me. But then, pregnant women do tend to make everything so awkward, don't they? Taking up so much space, making every room feel just a little too crowded. Laughter rippled through the crowd, polite, genteel laughter that slithered between designer gowns and custom suits, the kind that allowed participation in cruelty while maintaining plausible deniability. Eva's eyes darted across the sea of faces. She recognized them. Margaret Chen, who'd complimented her dress last month. Thomas Rivera, who'd told her she was glowing just an hour ago. Sarah and David Morrison, who'd sent a gift basket when they'd learned about the pregnancy. None of them moved. None of them spoke up. Their phones remained raised, cameras recording, capturing every angle for whatever purpose amused them. Social currency, gossip, entertainment, it didn't matter. In this moment, surrounded by hundreds, Eva had never felt more alone. Dashiell's hand found the small of Vivian's back, possessive and public. He pulled his mistress closer and the message landed with brutal clarity. This wasn't a betrayal he was trying to hide. This was a declaration, a changing of the guard, a statement about value and replaceability. Eva searched his face for some remnant of the man who'd proposed to her 2 years ago on a beach in Santorini, who'd promised stability and a life far removed from chaos. That man, if he'd ever truly existed, was gone. In his place stood someone performing for an audience, feeding on their approval, growing stronger with each laugh and whispered comment. "Darling." His voice was smooth, controlled, the same tone he used during business negotiations. "You're making a scene. Perhaps you should go freshen up. You look unwell." The audacity stole her breath. She was making the scene. Not Vivian, who'd just committed assault. Not Dashiell, who'd brought his mistress to what was supposed to be a celebration of his company's latest acquisition. The victim was being reframed as the problem, and worse, everyone was accepting that narrative with eager nods. She could already imagine tomorrow's headlines, the social media posts, the think pieces. Poor Dashiell Copeland, stuck with an emotional, unstable wife. No wonder he sought comfort elsewhere. Eva's hand trembled as she wiped champagne from her eyes. The liquid stung, or maybe that was just her tears mixing with it. Her red maternity gown, chosen so carefully that morning because Dashiell had once mentioned he loved her in red, now clung to her skin in dark, wet patches. A phone flashed nearby. Jessica Lang, society columnist, capturing a close-up of Eva's ruined face. She didn't lower her camera, didn't stop recording, just smiled apologetically as if to say it's nothing personal, just business. That was the elite, Eva had learned. Everything was business, every interaction transactional, every relationship monetized or weaponized depending on which served better in the moment. She'd known this, of course, observed it from the periphery during her 2 years as Dashiell's wife, but she'd foolishly believed that being married to one of them offered protection, some immunity from their casual cruelty. She'd been catastrophically wrong. Dashiell leaned down, whispered something in Vivian's ear. The blonde woman giggled, actually giggled, and kissed his cheek, leaving a lipstick mark he made no effort to wipe away. The crowd exhaled collectively. Tension broke as conversations resumed. Waiters circulated with fresh champagne, and the jazz quartet in the corner launched into something upbeat and mindless. The show was over. Eva was dismissed, already forgotten as the party moved on to its next entertainment. Eva finally found the strength to move. Her legs felt like lead, each step requiring conscious effort, but she managed to turn toward the exit. The crowd parted for her, though not out of courtesy. They simply didn't want to be associated with her humiliation, didn't want photographic evidence that they'd been stepping too close when she'd been destroyed. She kept her head up, her spine straight despite everything screaming at her to collapse. She passed a mirror and caught her reflection. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, her hair hanging in wet strands, the red dress that had made her feel beautiful that morning now making her look like a wounded animal trying to crawl away. She looked away quickly, unable to bear the sight. Behind her, Dashiell's laughter echoed through the ballroom, deep and confident and completely unburdened by guilt or consequence. He'd won. Publicly humiliated her, claimed another woman, faced zero repercussions. In fact, judging by the approving nods and congratulatory handshakes he was receiving, his social capital had somehow increased. The powerful could do whatever they wanted to whomever they wanted. The world would reshape itself to justify their actions. Eva pushed through the ornate double doors into the lobby. The sudden quiet felt violent after the ballroom's chaos. Her heels clicked against marble as she made her way toward the exit, past floral arrangements that cost more than most people's rent, past staff members who averted their eyes with practiced skill. She'd almost reached the main entrance when she felt it. A shift in the air, a change in pressure, like a storm rolling in, invisible but undeniable. The concierge's phone rang. He answered it, listened, then his expression changed. Fear. Actual, genuine fear on the face of a man who dealt with billionaires and celebrities daily. Behind her, the ballroom doors opened. Voices spilled out, then abruptly cut off. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't polite quiet. This was the stunned silence of people who'd forgotten how to breathe. Eva turned slowly, her heart hammering for reasons she didn't yet understand. Through the lobby's glass doors, she saw a black sedan idling at the curb. The kind of vehicle that cost more than most houses but somehow managed to look understated, unremarkable, forgettable. Except it wasn't. There was something about it that commanded attention, that whispered of danger and consequence. The rear door opened. A man stepped out, his movements economical and precise. Dark gray suit, perfectly tailored. Black shirt underneath, no tie. The cut of the fabric couldn't quite hide the ink that crept up from his collar, couldn't quite soften the hard angles of his face. He looked at the building, then at the entrance. Then for just a fraction of a second, his eyes found hers through the glass. Eva's world tilted. Her knees buckled and she grabbed the nearest column for support, her purse slipping from her shoulder to the floor. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. She'd left that life behind 5 years ago, had buried that part of herself so deep she'd almost convinced herself it had never existed, changed her name, moved across California, built an entirely new identity. She'd been so careful, so thorough, but Soren Cade had found her anyway. And judging by the 3 men emerging from the sedan behind him, each one radiating controlled violence that made security guards step back instead of forward, he hadn't come alone. The years collapsed. 5 years of distance, of carefully constructed normalcy, of convincing herself she'd made the right choice. All of it crumbled in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She was 23 again, watching him walk into the Koreatown restaurant where she waitressed, moving with that same purposeful awareness that had made her drop an entire tray of glasses. She was standing in a small courthouse, saying vows to a man whose world terrified her even as his gentleness made her feel safer than she'd ever felt. She was packing a bag in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, hands shaking, tears falling, knowing she was breaking something that couldn't be repaired but unable to stop herself. She was reading his face the morning after she'd left. Except she hadn't, because he'd never chased her, never given her the satisfaction of seeing his reaction, never confirmed that her departure had mattered at all. Until now. Soren stood perfectly still on the sidewalk, his expression unreadable in the way she remembered too well. That carefully controlled blankness that revealed nothing and promised everything. 5 years hadn't softened him. If anything, the edges had sharpened. The danger that had always simmered beneath his surface now radiated outward like heat from summer asphalt. The column felt cold against Eva's palm, the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly turned liquid and unstable. She couldn't look away from him, couldn't force her eyes to break contact even though every survival instinct screamed at her to run. But where would she run? Back to the ballroom where her husband had just publicly claimed another woman? To the apartment she shared with a man who'd spent 2 years systematically destroying who she was, to the carefully constructed life that had revealed itself tonight as nothing more than a different kind of prison? Soren began walking toward the entrance. His 3 associates flanked him in formation that was clearly practiced, clearly purposeful. The doorman reached for the handle, then seemed to think better of it, stepping aside as if some primal instinct warned them not to impede this particular man's path. Ava's breathing came in short, sharp gasps. Her baby kicked, sensing her distress, and she pressed her hand to her belly in automatic comfort. Whatever was about to happen, whatever Soren's presence meant, One thing had become crystalline clear in this moment of reckoning. She'd spent 5 years running from the wrong man. The glass doors swept open with a whisper of hydraulics. The temperature in the lobby seemed to drop 10 degrees. Soren crossed the threshold first, his footsteps silent despite the marble floor, moving with that same economy of motion that suggested every action had been calculated and stripped of unnecessary flourish. His associates followed in perfect synchronization. 3 men who looked like they'd been carved from the same stone, their faces blank, their eyes constantly scanning, cataloging exits and threats and vulnerabilities with automated precision. The concierge's hand hovered over his phone, frozen mid-dial. His throat worked as he swallowed. Eva watched him make the decision in real time. Whatever number he'd been about to call, whatever security protocol he'd been trained to follow, none of it would matter. Some threats couldn't be stopped by procedures and policies. Some dangers operated on a frequency that bypassed normal channels of authority entirely. He lowered the phone slowly, carefully, as if afraid any sudden movement might draw attention. Soren's eyes swept the lobby, taking in the marble columns, the fresh flower arrangements, the gold-accented fixtures that screamed old money trying to look older. His gaze passed over Eva without pause, without recognition, as if she were just another piece of expensive decoration. The lack of acknowledgement hurt more than she'd expected. A sharp reminder that whatever they'd been to each other had ended the moment she'd walked out their penthouse door 5 years ago. But there was something in the set of his shoulders, the angle of his approach, that told her he knew exactly where she was. He'd always known where she was. Through the still open doors, Eva caught a glimpse of the street. 2 more sedans had pulled up, blocking traffic. Men in dark suits stood beside them, not making a show of their presence, but not hiding it either. A police car approached, lights off, then seemed to think better of whatever intervention it had planned and turned down a side street. The message was clear. This situation had already been handled at levels far above street patrol. In the ballroom, the music had stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence, replaced by the kind of silence that only comes when a room full of people collectively holds its breath. Eva heard the click of heels as someone, probably Vivian, shifted position, followed by Dashiell's low voice asking a question she couldn't make out. No one answered him. The power dynamics that had governed the room 30 seconds ago had evaporated, replaced by something more primal. Fear had a smell, Eva remembered from her years with Soren, metallic and sharp like blood or copper or lightning about to strike. Soren reached the ballroom doors and paused. One of his associates, a man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, moved forward and pushed both doors open simultaneously. The Baroque handles swung inward with theatrical slowness, revealing the frozen tableau inside. 200 of Los Angeles' elite stood scattered across the marble floor like chess pieces mid-game, their champagne flutes suspended, their smartphones lowered, their carefully cultivated masks of superiority cracking to reveal something raw underneath. Soren entered, and the room seemed to contract around him. Not because of his physical size, he wasn't particularly tall or broad, but because of the way space itself reorganized in his presence. He became the center of gravity, the point around which everything else orbited. His associates fanned out behind him, taking positions Eva recognized from a lifetime ago. Exits covered, sightlines maintained, threats assessed and prioritized. The guests nearest the door stumbled backward, their expensive shoes tangling with each other in their haste to create distance. A champagne flute slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the marble. The sound rang out absurdly loud in the stretched silence. No one moved to clean it up. The waitstaff had melted into the walls, becoming invisible through sheer will and survival instinct. Dashiell stood frozen near the center of the room, Vivian still tucked against his knee, though her earlier confidence had evaporated. His face cycled through expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, irritation, then slowly dawning unease as he registered what everyone else already understood. This wasn't a guest who'd wandered in from another event. This wasn't a drunk party crasher or a delivery gone wrong. This was something else entirely, something his money and connections and carefully cultivated relationships couldn't shield him from. Eva watched him try to assert dominance anyway, because that was what men like Dashiell did. He straightened his shoulders, adjusted his bow tie, took a step forward as if approaching a business negotiation rather than his own reckoning. His voice came out steady, controlled, the same tone he'd used when firing employees or denying Eva's request for grocery money despite the 6 figures sitting in their joint account. I don't know who you think you are, but this is a private event. You need to leave before I have security escort you out. The threat landed like a stone in deep water, sinking without ripple or effect. Soren didn't respond, didn't even look at Dashiell directly. His gaze continued its sweep of the room, cataloging faces, making mental notes of who was present and where they stood in whatever hierarchy governed his world. Eva recognized several people visibly trying to shrink, to become smaller, to avoid that casual assessment. Richard Thornton, real estate developer, actually took several steps backward until he bumped into a column. Miranda Chen, tech CEO and self-proclaimed disruptor, suddenly found her phone fascinating, her fingers trembling as they typed nothing. Dashiell's face reddened, his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Vivian had detached herself from his side, backing toward a cluster of older women who'd formed an unseen protective circle as if age and money could serve as armor against whatever was unfolding. Did you hear me? Dashiell's voice rose slightly, a hairline fracture in his control. He heard you. One of Soren's associates spoke for the first time, his accent placing him somewhere in Seoul's business districts. His tone was flat, informative rather than threatening. Everyone heard you. It changes nothing. Dashiell opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Eva watched him search the room for allies, for the security team that should have responded minutes ago, for the influential friends who'd been clapping him on the back and recording his wife's humiliation. No one met his eyes. The security guards who usually stood at discreet intervals along the walls had vanished. His friends had developed sudden interest in the floor, the ceiling, the abstract art hanging in gilded frames. The people who'd laughed at Eva's destruction now wanted no part of what was happening to him. Soren finally moved, taking 3 steps forward that brought him into the light of the central chandelier. The illumination caught the ink at his collar, revealing the edge of a design Eva knew continued across his shoulders and down his back. A dragon rendered in traditional style by a master artist in Busan, each scale placed with deliberate meaning, the whole piece telling a story about protection and fire and things that couldn't be destroyed. She'd traced those lines once, had fallen asleep with her head against those scales, had kissed the dragon's eye between his shoulder blades on mornings when sunlight turned their bedroom gold. The memory hit her like a physical blow, stealing breath, making her grab the doorframe for support. Where is she? Soren's voice was quiet, almost conversational. He wasn't asking Dashiell, he was asking the room, and somehow that was worse. The question hung in the air like smoke, spreading and suffocating. Dashiell's confusion was genuine. Where is who? What are you? The woman who was humiliated here tonight. Soren's tone didn't change, didn't rise or sharpen. It remained perfectly level, perfectly calm. The pregnant woman who had champagne poured on her head while 200 people watched and did nothing. That woman. Where is she? The words landed like grenades in silk wrapping. Ava's breath caught. He hadn't come for business or territory or whatever wars men like him usually fought. He'd come for her. Dashiell's face cycled through emotions too quickly to catalog. Confusion giving way to recognition, recognition blooming into fear, fear hardening into defensive aggression. He glanced toward where Eva had exited, then back to Soren, and something in his expression shifted. As pieces began assembling themselves into a picture he didn't want to see, his hand went to his pocket, reaching for his phone, the lifeline he'd always relied on to solve problems that money and influence could fix. Before he could pull it out, one of Soren's associates moved with startling speed, crossing the distance and placing a hand on Dashiell's wrist. Not violently, not even forcefully. Just enough pressure to suggest that reaching for that phone would be a mistake Dashiell wouldn't get to regret. "You don't need to make any calls." The man's voice was soft, almost gentle. "The people you'd call are already aware of the situation. They've chosen not to intervene." Dashiell jerked his arm away, but the phone stayed in his pocket. "You can't just walk in here and threaten me. Do you have any idea who I am? Who these people are?" He gestured broadly at the room, at the assembled wealth and power that had always been his shield. "One call and I'll have 50 lawyers. Thomas Gallagher withdrew his firm from your retainer an hour ago." Soren's voice cut through Dashiell's bluster like a surgical blade, precise and merciless. "Citing conflicts of interest. You'll find the termination letter in your email." Gerald Schwartz at Pinnacle Legal followed 20 minutes later, as did Jessica Moreno at Whitfield and Associates. The color drained from Dashiell's face. Those weren't just lawyers. They were his lawyers, the legal architecture that protected his business dealings and personal interests. Eva watched him process this information, watched him try to find the angle, the explanation that didn't lead to the conclusion currently forming. "Your primary accounts at Sentinel Private Banking were frozen at 7:30 this evening." Soren continued, his tone never changing, never rising. He could have been reading stock quotes or discussing the weather pending investigation into irregular transactions flagged by federal regulators. The secondary accounts at Harbor Wealth Management followed at 7:45. Your line of credit was suspended. Your investment portfolio is under audit. The IRS received an anonymous tip regarding offshore holdings approximately 3 hours ago. They found it credible enough to act immediately. Dashiell's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Someone in the crowd, Richard Thornton maybe, or one of the other men who'd been laughing 30 minutes ago, made a soft sound of distress. The implications were spreading like blood in water. If Dashiell could fall this quickly, this completely, then none of them were safe. Their money, their power, their carefully constructed empires could be dismantled in an evening by someone who understood how to pull the right threads. "That's impossible," Dashiell finally managed, though his voice had lost its authority. "Those accounts have protocols, safeguards. You can't just—" "Your business partner, Montgomery Webb, sold his 43% stake in Copeland Industries to a shell corporation based in Singapore at 6:45 this afternoon." Soren tilted his head slightly, a gesture Eva remembered from their marriage. He did it when explaining something to someone who should already understand. "The corporation is owned by another corporation, which is owned by a trust, which is controlled by people you've never met and never will. Montgomery is currently on a plane to Auckland with his family. He won't be returning your calls." Dashiell swayed as if the floor had become unstable beneath his Italian leather shoes. The ballroom's chandelier light caught the sweat beginning to form on his temples, the way his pupils dilated with the first real taste of fear he'd probably experienced in decades. "Montgomery wouldn't. We've been partners for 15 years. His voice cracked on the last word, a hairline fracture in the armor of certainty he'd worn his entire life. "Montgomery was shown evidence of your creative accounting practices." Soren's delivery remained surgical, each word placed with deliberate precision. "The money you've been siphoning from the employee pension fund, the bribes paid to secure the Henderson contract, the insider trading that netted you $7 million last quarter." He was given a choice: cooperate and walk away clean, or face federal prosecution alongside you. He chose survival. Most people do. The room had gone so quiet Eva could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She'd moved closer without realizing it, drawn toward the destruction of the man who'd spent 2 years systematically destroying her. She should feel something, satisfaction, vindication, the sweet rush of justice. But all she felt was a hollow sort of numbness, like watching a building collapse in slow motion, each floor pancaking onto the next in an inexorable cascade of consequence. Vivian had detached herself completely now, backing away from Dashiell as if his downfall might be contagious, as if proximity to a falling star could burn. Her face was pale under her makeup, her earlier cruelty replaced by naked self-preservation. Several other guests had begun edging toward the exits, subtle movements they probably thought were discreet. Soren's associates tracked each departure with their eyes, but made no move to stop anyone. This performance wasn't for them. The board of Copeland Industries held an emergency meeting 20 minutes ago. Soren continued, his tone suggesting he was reading a weather report rather than dismantling a man's entire existence. You've been removed as CEO effective immediately. They cited erratic behavior and pending legal issues. Your severance package has been revoked due to the morality clause you signed 3 years ago. The one about bringing the company into disrepute. You are the disrepute, in case that needed clarification. Dashiell lunged forward, all pretense of control abandoned, his face contorting with rage and desperation in equal measure. You can't do this. This is my company. I built it from nothing. Everything I have, everything you have was built on lies, intimidation, and the exploitation of people weaker than you. Soren's voice finally changed, dropping to something colder, harder, like steel pulled from ice. You thought power meant being able to humiliate a pregnant woman in a room full of witnesses. You thought it meant no one would stop you because no one ever has. You were wrong. He took a single step closer to Dashiell, and the movement carried more threat than a raised fist, more violence than any weapon. Real power is quiet. It doesn't need audiences or approval. It doesn't require anyone to watch or record or validate it. Real power is the ability to dismantle someone's entire existence, while they're too busy performing for a crowd to notice the ground disappearing beneath their feet. Dashiell's legs gave out. He didn't fall dramatically, but rather folded, his knees buckling until he was half sitting on the edge of a nearby chair, his hands shaking as he pressed them to his face. What do you want? Money? I can get you money. Just tell me what you want. His voice came out muffled through his fingers, stripped of every ounce of the authority he'd wielded just minutes ago. I don't want anything from you. Soren's dismissal was absolute, final as a door closing. You have nothing I need, nothing I couldn't take if I wanted. You're not a negotiation or a business transaction. You're a consequence. He turned away from Dashiell as if the man had ceased to exist, his attention shifting to scan the room once more. His gaze found Margaret Chen, the woman who'd complimented Eva's dress last month while filming her humiliation tonight. You should delete that video, all of you should. His words were quiet, almost conversational. The footage from tonight has a way of disappearing. Phones malfunction, cloud storage corrupts, hard drives fail. It would be unfortunate if your device was the exception. The sound of people frantically tapping their phones filled the ballroom like rain on a tin roof. Eva watched 200 powerful individuals scramble to erase evidence like school children caught cheating, their fingers flying across screens, their faces tight with fear. No one questioned the instruction. No one protested or cited their rights. They simply complied because the alternative had been demonstrated with surgical clarity through Dashiell's destruction. Soren's eyes finally, deliberately found Eva's across the distance between ballroom and lobby. The contact lasted less than a second, but in that fraction of time she saw everything she'd run from 5 years ago. The danger, yes, the violence, absolutely, but also the protection, The fierce and uncompromising loyalty, the quality she'd mistaken for control when really it had been devotion expressed in the only language he knew. He looked away first, releasing her from the weight of his attention. "We're done here." The words were directed at his associates, who moved immediately, forming up around him in their practiced configuration. He walked toward the exit, toward where Eva still stood frozen by the column, and she pressed herself back instinctively, her body remembering patterns from half a decade ago. He passed within 3 feet of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, cedar and smoke, unchanged after all these years, a scent that had once meant safety and now meant something she didn't have words for. Close enough that she could see the dragon's scales rendered in ink at his collar, each line as familiar as her own reflection. He didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't acknowledge her existence beyond that single glance in the ballroom. The doors whispered shut behind them with a soft click, and the spell broke. Someone sobbed. Another person vomited into a potted plant. Dashiell remained slumped in his chair, his empire reduced to ash, his future evaporated. The reckoning had lasted less than 10 minutes. That was all the time it took to unmake a man who'd believed himself untouchable. Eva stood in the lobby watching the sedans pull away, their taillights disappearing into the Los Angeles night like embers fading. Her hand remained pressed against her belly, feeling the baby's movements. Each kick a reminder that whatever just happened wasn't about her alone anymore. She was responsible for another life, a tiny person who would ask questions someday about how they came into this world and what kind of people their parents were. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing and clarifying all at once. Behind her, the ballroom had erupted into controlled chaos. Voices overlapped in urgent whispers, phones rang with calls from lawyers and publicists and damage control specialists. She heard Dashiell's voice rising above the others, desperate and pleading, trying to reach someone who might still take his call. No one was listening. The crowd that had recorded her humiliation with such enthusiasm was now focused entirely on their own survival, calculating how much distance they needed to put between themselves and the wreckage of Dashiell Copeland. Eva's phone vibrated in her small clutch purse. She pulled it out with trembling fingers, half expecting to see Soren's name on the screen after 5 years of Sunz. But it wasn't him. It was a text from an unknown number, a local area code she didn't recognize. The message was brief, almost clinical in its precision. Keys to apartment 4B, 1247 Riverside Drive, are with the concierge. 6 months paid in advance. Furnished, safe. Medical coverage arranged at St. Catherine's under Dr. Margot Whitmore, OB specialist. File for divorce Monday. Lawyer's contact information in envelope at apartment. You will not be bothered again. No signature, no name, no request for gratitude or acknowledgement. Just facts, resources, a path forward laid out with the same surgical efficiency he'd used to dismantle Dashiell. Eva stared at the message until her vision blurred, reading it 3 times to make sure she understood what was happening. He'd planned this, not just tonight's intervention, but everything after. Created an exit strategy that required nothing from her except the courage to take it. A second text arrived seconds later, even shorter than the first. "The baby. Is it safe?" Her throat tightened until breathing became a conscious effort. Of course, that would be his only question. Not about her, not about them, not about the 5 years that had passed or the life she'd built without him. Just the child, the innocent party in this catastrophe, the one person who deserved protection above all else. She typed back with shaking fingers, her thumb slipping twice on the screen before she managed to hit send. "Yes, we're both safe." The response came immediately, as if he'd been waiting for confirmation. Good. Nothing else followed. Eva waited, her phone screen glowing in the dim lobby light, but the conversation was apparently over. That was Soren's way, she remembered with sudden clarity. Say what needed saying. Do what needed doing. then walk away without demanding recognition or gratitude. She'd mistaken that quality for coldness once, for emotional unavailability, for the inability to connect. Now she understood it was something else entirely: respect. He respected her enough not to trap her with obligation or guilt, respected her choices even when they'd led her away from him. The concierge cleared his throat softly. Eva looked up to find him holding out a small envelope with her name written on it in precise handwriting she would have recognized anywhere. "This was left for you, Mrs. Copeland." Or... He hesitated, uncertain what name to use now that her marriage had imploded so spectacularly. "Miss Thorne." She took the envelope, noting how the concierge avoided meeting her eyes. Word had already spread through the staff about what transpired upstairs, about the pregnant woman who'd been humiliated and the dangerous man who'd arrived to tear her husband's world apart. By tomorrow it would be all over social media, the society columns, the whisper networks that governed elite circles, but the story would be different from the one Dashiell had tried to write. Instead of a pathetic, unstable wife making a scene, she'd be the woman powerful enough to summon a phantom, mysterious enough to have hidden a past that could destroy empires. The envelope contained 3 items: a key card for the apartment building Soren had mentioned, a business card for an attorney named Rebecca Hahn, who apparently specialized in high-conflict divorces, and a handwritten note on heavy cardstock. The note was brief, just like his texts, but the handwriting made her chest ache with recognition. She'd seen that writing on birthday cards, on notes left on the kitchen counter, on the single letter he'd written during a fight about whether she should go back to school. "You chose safety over happiness once. Now you know the difference. Choose better this time. For the baby. For yourself. You were always stronger than you believed." No signature, but she didn't need one. Eva folded the note carefully and placed it back in the envelope, then turned to face the concierge. "Could you call me a car? Not from the building service, an independent one." He nodded quickly, grateful to have a concrete task, and moved to make the call. While he worked, Eva walked to one of the lobby's leather couches and sat down carefully, arranging her champagne-stained dress around her swollen belly. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished marble floor, a woman who looked nothing like the person she'd been 3 hours ago. That version of herself had believed she needed to be smaller, quieter, more accommodating to deserve safety, had accepted humiliation as the price of stability, had convinced herself that love and cruelty could coexist as long as the cruelty stayed verbal. Through the ballroom doors she could see Dashiell pacing, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing frantically at people who'd stopped listening. Vivian had disappeared entirely, probably already crafting her narrative about being an innocent party manipulated by a powerful man. The guests were filtering out through side exits, avoiding the main lobby where Eva sat as if her presence might contaminate them further. Margaret Chen walked past, her eyes downcast. Eva felt a flicker of anger cut through her numbness. This woman had complimented her dress while filming her destruction, had participated in the cruelty with casual enthusiasm of someone who'd never faced consequences. "Margaret." Eva's voice was steadier than she expected. The woman froze, her face cycling through fear and calculation before settling on an expression of false sympathy. "Evangeline, I'm so sorry about what happened. If I'd known." "You did know." Eva interrupted quietly, her words precise as scalpels. "You stood there and watched. You filmed it. You could have said something, done something, been anything other than complicit. But you chose to be part of it because it was easier than standing up for someone with no power." Margaret's mouth opened and closed, her practiced social grace failing her completely. "I didn't mean, it wasn't personal. That's worse, that you'd participate in destroying someone and have it mean nothing to you." that it was just entertainment, just content, just another story to share at brunch. You should think about that, about what it says about who you are. She didn't wait for a response, just turned back to face the windows, dismissing Margaret the way she'd been dismissed countless times in the past 2 years. The woman scurried away, and Eva felt something shift inside her. Not satisfaction exactly, but a small reclamation of dignity, of the right to name what had been done to her and hold people accountable for their choices. The car arrived, a simple sedan with an older driver who looked at her champagne-soaked dress without judgment or curiosity. Eva gave him the Riverside Drive address and settled into the back seat, watching the Beverly Grand Hotel recede through the rear window. She thought about Dashiell, about what remained of his life after tonight. Part of her, the part that had loved him once, or thought she did, felt a twinge of sympathy. But it was small and distant, overpowered by the memory of standing in that ballroom, pregnant and humiliated, while he smiled and the world watched. The apartment Soren had arranged was in a quiet building far from the elite neighborhoods where Dashiell had insisted they live. The lobby was clean but modest, with real plants instead of expensive floral arrangements, with a security guard who nodded kindly instead of assessing her worth. The fourth-floor unit was exactly as promised, furnished simply but comfortably with a bedroom that had already been set up as a nursery. Someone had hung blackout curtains and assembled a crib, had stocked the drawers with baby clothes in neutral colors, had placed prenatal vitamins and pregnancy books on the nightstand. Eva walked through the space slowly, running her fingers along the furniture, opening drawers and closets. Everything she needed was here. Toiletries, maternity clothes in her size, a fully stocked kitchen. It was comprehensive and impersonal, the work of someone who'd tasked assistants with creating a safe space without injecting his own presence into it. No personal touches, no messages hidden in drawers, nothing that would make her feel obligated or watched or possessed. Just resources and space and the freedom to decide what came next. She found her way to the nursery and stood in the doorway, one hand on her belly, looking at the crib that would soon hold her child. A boy, the ultrasound had revealed, though she hadn't told Dashiell. He'd wanted a girl, had already picked out a name that sounded more like a business acquisition than a person. Her son would need a different name, one that represented hope instead of ownership, one that reminded him he was loved for who he was rather than what he could become. Her phone buzzed with notifications, texts from acquaintances asking if she was okay, probably more curious than concerned. Emails from Dashiell's lawyer attempting to establish contact. A voicemail from Dashiell himself, drunk and rambling, alternating between apologies and accusations. She deleted them all without reading or listening completely. That life was over. Those people had shown her exactly who they were when it mattered, and she believed them. The only message she kept was the one from the unknown number, the one that had given her this apartment and this chance. She read it one more time, then typed out a response she'd been composing in her head during the entire drive. Thank you for everything, for tonight, for this, for respecting my choice 5 years ago even though it hurt, for not making me choose again now, for showing me the difference between control and protection. I understand now what I didn't then. You deserve to know. It's a boy, he's healthy, and he'll grow up knowing that real strength means protecting people without demanding they belong to you. She hesitated before adding the final line, her thumb hovering over the screen. You were the dangerous man I ran from, but Dashiell was the dangerous man I should have run from. I'm sorry it took me so long to learn the difference. The message sent and she waited, but no response came. She hadn't really expected one. Soren had said what he needed to say through his actions tonight, had demonstrated the difference between a man who controlled through fear and a man who protected through power. He'd walked away because staying would have put her in exactly the position he'd freed her from, beholden, obligated, trapped by gratitude into choices that weren't really choices at all. Eva changed out of her ruined dress and into comfortable clothes someone had left in the bedroom closet, then made herself tea in the small kitchen. She stood by the window looking out at the city lights, drinking chamomile, feeling her son move inside her. And for the first time in 2 years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. Not happiness, not yet. That would take time to rebuild, layers of healing stacked carefully atop each other until she could stand without weight. But peace. The quiet certainty that she was finally safe in a way that didn't require making herself smaller. Her phone buzzed one final time. A news alert about Dashiell Copeland, CEO, removed amid federal investigation, assets frozen, business empire in freefall. The article was already trending, the comments full of people who'd never met Dashiell but felt entitled to opinions about his downfall. Eva closed the notification without reading further. His consequences were his own, earned through choices he'd made freely, through cruelties he'd inflicted deliberately. She wasn't responsible for his redemption or destruction. She was only responsible for herself and the child she carried, for building a life rooted in dignity rather than fear, for teaching her son that real power meant knowing when to walk away. Soren had taught her that lesson tonight, not through words but through demonstration. He'd shown her that protection didn't require possession, that caring for someone sometimes meant leaving them free to choose their own path, that the strongest thing you could do was dismantle someone's ability to hurt the people you loved, and then walk away without demanding recognition. That was power. Everything else was just cruelty dressed up in expensive suits and empty promises. And Evangeline Thorne was done with cruelty. She'd survived it twice now, from 2 very different men. The experience had taught her something precious. She didn't need someone to save her. She needed the space and resources to save herself. And that was exactly what she'd been given. Not a rescue, but a foundation. What she built on it would be entirely her choice. Eva returned to the nursery, standing in the doorway with her hand pressed against her belly, feeling her son's movements beneath her palm. She thought about the conversation she'd have with him someday, about his father and the choices she'd made and the man who'd protected them both from shadows. She'd tell him the truth, that his mother had run from danger once and found cruelty instead, that she'd learned the difference between men who cage and men who free, that the rarest strength is protecting without possessing. And she'd teach him, through every choice she made from this moment forward, that real power is quiet. It doesn't need audiences or approval. It doesn't require anyone to watch or validate it. Real power is the ability to build a life worth living, to choose dignity over comfort, to walk away from anything that demands you become smaller. Her phone stayed silent. Soren had said everything he needed to say. The rest was up to her. Eva walked to the window one last time, looking out at the sprawling lights of Los Angeles. Somewhere in this city, Dashiell was drowning in the consequences of his choices. Somewhere else, Soren was returning to whatever empire he'd built in her absence. And here, in a quiet apartment far from both of them, she was finally free to discover who Evangeline Thorne could become when no one was watching, when no one was controlling, when the only person she had to answer to was herself. She placed her hand on the window glass, feeling the cool surface against her palm, and made a promise to the sun growing inside her. You will never see me accept cruelty in silence. You will never watch me make myself smaller to fit someone else's vision. You will grow up knowing that strength isn't domination. It's the courage to choose yourself even when the world says you shouldn't. The baby kicked in response, as if sealing the contract. Eva smiled for the first time in months, a real smile that reached her eyes and crinkled the corners and turned away from the window. Tomorrow she'd call Dr. Whitmore, start the process of reclaiming her health and her body and her choices. Tomorrow she'd meet with Rebecca Han and begin dismantling the legal ties that bound her to Dashiell. Tomorrow she'd start building the foundation for a life she chose rather than one that chose her. But tonight she allowed herself to simply stand in the nursery, hand on her belly, breathing in the cedar-scented air that somehow still carried traces of the cologne that had passed too close in a hotel lobby, and acknowledged the truth she'd spent 5 years running from. Soren Cade had never been the dangerous man, he'd been the dangerous world, and the only thing he'd ever wanted from her was the freedom to be herself, even if that meant being herself without him. Dashiell Copeland had been safe, respectable, normal, and he'd spent 2 years systematically destroying every piece of who she was, until nothing remained but an empty vessel designed to reflect his glory. The dangerous man had set her free tonight. The safe man had tried to bury her alive, and now, finally, she understood the difference. Eva woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, disoriented for 3 full seconds before memory crashed back. The apartment, the escape, the destruction of Dashiell Copeland broadcast to 200 witnesses, and however many thousand people those videos would have reached before Soren's quiet threat convinced them to delete. Her phone showed 7:23 a.m. and 47 missed calls. She scrolled through them without opening, Dashiell's number appearing 23 times, various society acquaintances filling the rest, probably calling to extract gossip they could monetize at brunch. None from the number that mattered. She deleted the call log entirely and pulled up the text from last night, reading the address for St. Catherine's Hospital, Dr. Margot Whitmore's name attached. Her next prenatal appointment wasn't scheduled for 2 weeks, but somehow she suspected that had already been handled. The nursery looked different in morning light, less like a stranger's careful preparation and more like a promise waiting to be filled. Eva ran her hand along the crib rail, solid oak that would outlast fashion and trend, built to protect rather than impress. Her reflection in the bedroom mirror showed champagne-stained hair now dried into stiff waves, mascara she'd been too exhausted to remove properly, a red dress crumpled on the bathroom floor like a shed skin. She looked like someone emerging from a battle, which she supposed she was. The shower ran hot enough to turn her skin pink, washing away more than just physical residue. She watched the water circle the drain and thought about purification, about baptism, about emerging clean into something new. Dramatic maybe, but last night had been nothing if not dramatic. Clean clothes waited in the closet, maternity jeans in her exact size, soft cotton shirts in neutrals, a lightweight cardigan against morning chill. Someone had done thorough research, or perhaps Soren simply remembered her sizes from 5 years ago, remembered everything about her body the way she still remembered the precise placement of ink across his shoulders. She pushed that thought away and focused on coffee, decaf, already stocked in the kitchen along with the specific brand of oat milk she preferred. The attention to detail should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like being known, like being seen by someone who'd spent 5 years watching from enough distance to respect her choices, but close enough to notice what mattered. Her phone buzzed. Not a call, but an email from Rebecca Han, the divorce attorney whose card sat on the kitchen counter. The message was brief and professional. Ms. Thorne, I've been retained to represent you in dissolution proceedings against Dashiell Copeland. I've taken the liberty of filing initial paperwork this morning given the time-sensitive nature of your situation. Please call my office at your earliest convenience to discuss next steps. You are under no obligation to retain my services, but I should mention that Mr. Copeland will find it extraordinarily difficult to locate representation willing to oppose me on this matter. The subtle flex at the end made Eva smile despite everything. Soren had chosen well. An attorney confident enough to file before consultation, connected enough to make veiled threats about the opposition's prospects. She called the number. A receptionist answered on the first ring, professional warmth in her voice as she transferred Eva directly to Rebecca Hahn without the usual gatekeeping dance. "Ms. Thorne, I'm glad you called." Rebecca's voice was crisp, assured, the kind of competence that came from winning cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. "I want to be clear about several things before we proceed. First, your retainer has been paid in full for the duration of proceedings. Second, I've already received 14 calls this morning from various attorneys attempting to negotiate on Mr. Copeland's behalf. I've declined to engage. Third, based on evidence I've been provided, this will be the fastest dissolution in California history." "Evidence?" Eva's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Security footage from last night's event. Text messages between Mr. Copeland and Miss Ashford dating back 6 months. Financial records showing systematic control of your accounts and assets. A sworn affidavit from a witness regarding attempted intimidation and—" Rebecca paused, and Eva could hear the smile in her voice. "A rather compelling recording of Mr. Copeland soliciting violence against you, intercepted last night by parties unknown, and delivered to my office at 6 this morning, along with a notarized transcript." Eva's breath caught. The assassin. Soren had mentioned Dashiell hired someone. She'd assumed it was exaggeration, theater meant to justify the destruction. But no, Dashiell had actually tried to have her killed. The baby kicked hard against her ribs as if sensing her spike of adrenaline. "I need you to understand something, Ms. Thorne." Rebecca's voice gentled slightly. "With this evidence, we're not negotiating. We're dictating terms. Mr. Copeland will have no choice but to sign whatever we put in front of him, and he'll do it quickly because the alternative is federal prosecution for attempted murder for hire. Do you have any questions? When can I be legally free of him? 30 days if he cooperates, 60 if he doesn't, though I doubt he's that stupid. I'll have preliminary paperwork to you by end of business today." The call ended and Eva stood in the kitchen holding her phone, trying to process the whiplash of the past 12 hours. Yesterday morning she'd been trapped in a marriage with no clear exit. Yesterday evening she'd been publicly humiliated. Yesterday night her world had fractured and reformed, and she'd discovered that the man she'd run from had never stopped protecting her. And now, before breakfast, she was being told she'd be free in a month. The absurdity of it should have made her laugh. Instead she cried great heaving sobs that shook her whole body, her hand pressed against the counter for support. Not sad tears or happy tears, but released tears. The kind that came when pressure that had been building for years finally found an outlet. When the storm passed, she made toast and ate it standing by the window, watching Los Angeles wake up below her. Somewhere in this sprawling city, Dashiell was probably still drunk or newly sober and facing the magnitude of his losses. Somewhere else, Soren was conducting business as if last night had been a minor deviation from schedule rather than a calculated demolition. And here she stood, pregnant and alone and somehow more herself than she'd been in years. Her phone rang again, unknown number different from the one that had texted last night. She almost didn't answer, but something made her thumb slide across the screen. "Ms. Thorne? This is Dr. Margot Whitmore from St. Catherine's. I have you scheduled for a comprehensive prenatal appointment at 11 this morning. Is that time still convenient?" "I didn't make an appointment." The words came out automatically, though of course she hadn't made the appointment. "My records show it was arranged by your insurance provider yesterday evening. But if the time doesn't work—" "No, it's fine. 11 works." She hung up and checked the address. St. Catherine's was 20 minutes away, a well-regarded hospital in a quiet neighborhood far from the gleaming medical towers where Dashiell's concierge doctor practiced. Of course, Soren would have arranged medical care. Of course, he'd have thought 3 moves ahead, anticipating her needs before she articulated them. It should have annoyed her, this presumption of knowing what she required. Instead, it felt like being caught before she fell, like someone had placed safety nets she didn't know existed until she needed them. The appointment consumed the morning. Dr. Whitmore was thorough and kind, asking questions about stress and support systems, with enough delicacy to suggest she'd been briefed on the situation. The baby measured perfectly. Heartbeat strong and steady, all the numbers falling exactly where they should. Healthy baby boy. Dr. Whitmore confirmed what Eva already knew, her smile warm as she wiped gel from Eva's belly. Due date still tracking for mid-July. Do you have support at home? Someone who can help during late pregnancy and after delivery? I'm figuring that out. Eva's honesty surprised her, but something about Dr. Whitmore invited truth. The doctor nodded without judgment. Well, you have my direct line now. Any concerns, any questions, any middle-of-the-night worries, you call. That's what I'm here for. She left the hospital feeling steadier, more grounded in physical reality. Her son was healthy. Her body was doing what it needed to do. Everything else was just logistics and paperwork and the slow unwinding of legal ties. The afternoon brought a courier delivery. Thick manila envelope from Rebecca Hahn containing dissolution paperwork. Eva spread the documents across the kitchen table and read every word, marveling at the clinical language used to dismantle a marriage. Irreconcilable differences, separate property, no spousal support requested or awarded. The final page listed assets. The Riverside apartment under her name, 6 months paid with option to purchase. A bank account she didn't recognize containing enough money to live comfortably for 2 years. Full custody of the minor child, with Dashiell's parental rights contingent upon completion of rehabilitation and therapy programs. She signed her name on every indicated line, her signature different from the careful script she'd used on her marriage certificate. That had been Evangeline Copeland's signature, precise and small and designed to take up minimal space. This was Evangeline Thorne's signature, larger, bolder claiming room on the page. The documents went back in the envelope, ready for courier pickup in the morning, one step closer to freedom, to autonomy, to a life defined by her choices rather than someone else's requirements. Evening brought a different kind of visitor. Eva heard the knock and checked the peephole cautiously. A woman in her 60s, well-dressed but not ostentatious, holding a covered dish. I'm Helen from 4C. Saw you moved in yesterday. Thought you might not have had time to cook. Her smile was genuine, uncomplicated by ulterior motive or social currency calculation. Eva opened the door and accepted the dish. Lasagna, still warm, the smell making her stomach growl. Thank you. That's incredibly kind. Helen waved off the gratitude. Building looks out for each other here. You need anything, you knock on 4C. Got a spare crib if your delivery runs late. Diapers stockpiled from when my grandson visits. All the gear babies need that nobody tells you about. She left before Eva could properly respond. Just a neighbor being neighborly in a way that felt foreign after 2 years in Dashiell's world where every kindness carried price tags and expectations. Eva ate the lasagna standing at the counter, savoring layers of cheese and meat and homemade sauce, thinking about community, about the kind of village it takes to raise a child, about building a life from different materials than she'd used before. Night fell and brought with it the weight of silence. No Dashiell returning from work with demands disguised as requests. No performance required, no careful navigation of his moods, no bracing against casual cruelty delivered with a smile. Just her and the baby and the quiet hum of a city beyond the window. She tried to sleep but couldn't, her mind spinning through the past 24 hours, cataloging every moment, every choice, every revelation. Finally, she gave up and retrieved the envelope the concierge had given her. The one with Soren's handwritten note. The photographs were underneath, nestled in tissue paper she hadn't noticed before. 5 years of surveillance rendered in glossy prints. Eva outside her community college, textbooks under her arm. Eva at her first real marketing job, smiling at something a coworker said. Eva at the grocery store, carefully checking prices. Eva at the beach alone, her face turned toward the ocean. Each photo had a date stamped in the corner and a note in Soren's precise handwriting on the back. Year 1. Made sure you were safe, no contact, your choice respected. Year 2. Anonymous scholarship when you struggled with tuition. You earned it. I just removed barriers. Year 3. Your supervisor filed harassment complaint the day after he cornered you in the parking lot. I made one call. He transferred to Portland. Year 4. You met Dashiell Copeland. I ran background. I saw red flags. I didn't interfere. Your choice, even when I disagreed. Year 5. Emergency plan in place. If he ever hurt you, I'd be ready. Tonight proved necessary. Eva's hands shook holding the photographs, tears blurring the images until she had to set them down. 5 years. 5 years of protection from shadows, of respecting her autonomy while ensuring her safety, of loving her enough to let her go and watching her enough to know when she needed him. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. The man she'd fled because his world terrified her had spent half a decade being exactly what she'd needed. Present enough to help, distant enough to honor her choices. And Dashiell, the man she'd chosen for his safety and stability, had spent 2 years destroying her piece by piece until nothing remained but an empty shell designed to reflect his glory. She'd been so catastrophically wrong about which man represented danger. Her phone sat on the nightstand, Soren's number available but unused. Her fingers hovered over it a dozen times throughout the night, typing and deleting messages that never felt adequate. Thank you seemed insufficient. I'm sorry felt wrong. I understand now was accurate but incomplete. Finally, near midnight, she typed something true and hit send before she could second guess. 5 years you protected me while respecting my choice to leave. 2 years Dashiell destroyed me while I called it love. I'm sorry I didn't see the difference sooner. I'm grateful you saw it for me. The message showed delivered, but no response came. Eva hadn't expected one. Soren had said everything he needed to say through his actions. The apartment, the lawyer, the medical care, the systematic destruction of the man who'd hurt her. The photographs proving he'd never really left. What else was there to add? She fell asleep finally, her hand resting on her belly, and dreamed of dragons and scales and protection rendered in ink that couldn't be washed away. Morning brought news alerts. Dashiell Copeland arrested on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Federal prosecutors unusually forthcoming with details, the pension fund theft, the offshore accounts, the recorded conversation with a hired killer. Eva read the articles clinically, noting how quickly the narrative had shifted. Yesterday's successful CEO was today's white-collar criminal, his fall from grace complete and total. The media loved the attempted murder angle. Pregnant wife humiliated at a party. Husband so threatened by her existence he tried to have her killed. The fact that someone had intervened, someone dangerous enough to make evidence appear and people disappear and dismantle empires, remained frustratingly vague in all coverage. Mysterious benefactor, one article called it. Unknown party with access to high-level surveillance, another suggested. Eva read between the lines and understood that Soren had covered his tracks thoroughly. His name appeared nowhere, his involvement invisible to everyone except those who needed to know. Rebecca Hahn called with updates. Mr. Copeland's attorney, he finally found one willing to take his calls, has indicated his client will sign whatever we put in front of him in exchange for our agreement not to provide additional evidence to federal prosecutors. Her voice carried dark amusement. I told him we'd think about it. Let him sweat. Will you actually give them more? That depends on whether he cooperates fully with the dissolution. Right now, I'd say his odds of walking away with just a decade in federal prison are about 50-50. If he fights you on custody or assets, those odds drop precipitously. Eva felt nothing hearing this. No satisfaction, no vindication, just the cold certainty that consequences had finally caught up with someone who'd spent years outrunning them. The days blurred into a routine. Morning appointments with Dr. Whitmore tracking the baby's growth and her own health metrics. Afternoons organizing the apartment, washing baby clothes Helen had donated, reading books about infant care and early development. Evenings responding to Rebecca Hahn's updates about legal proceedings that were moving with unusual speed. Dashiell signed everything on day 12. Full custody to Eva, no visitation rights, no claim to assets or property, complete financial settlement that left him with nothing. Rebecca delivered the news with professional satisfaction. He's currently being processed into federal custody. Bail was denied given flight risk. You'll never have to see him again if you don't want to. I don't want to. The words came easily, without hesitation or guilt. Good. Then, as far as the legal system is concerned, you're a single mother with full autonomy over all decisions regarding your child. The dissolution will be final in 18 days. 18 days until she was legally free. 18 days until Evangeline Copeland ceased to exist and only Evangeline Thorne remained. She marked it on the calendar and tried to feel something beyond relief. The weeks passed in strange suspension, time moving both too fast and too slow, pregnancy advancing while her old life receded. Her belly grew rounder, her son's kicks growing stronger, physical evidence of the future literally growing inside her while the past dissolved into legal documents and news cycles. She avoided the internet mostly, didn't search her own name or Dashiell's or Soren's, let the world speculate and gossip and eventually move on to the next scandal. Her reality existed here in this quiet apartment, in prenatal appointments and nursery preparation and building something new from materials that actually belonged to her. Helen became a regular presence, dropping off meals and baby gear and stories about raising her own children 30 years ago. Other neighbors introduced themselves, the young couple in 3A who worked tech jobs, the retired teacher in 5B who offered to babysit, the maintenance man who checked that everything in her apartment functioned properly. Community, Eva learned, didn't require performance or payment. It just required presence and reciprocity and showing up for each other in small, consistent ways. She was folding baby clothes one afternoon when her phone rang. Unknown number again, different from all the previous unknowns. She answered cautiously. "Ms. Thorne, this is James Reeves from Sentinel Private Banking." The bank Soren had mentioned shutting down Dashiell's accounts. Eva's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm calling to inform you that a trust has been established in your name, specifically in the name of your minor child with you as trustee. The trust contains sufficient funds for college education, medical expenses, and general welfare through age 25. How much? She needed the specific number, needed to understand the magnitude. $2 million, invested conservatively to generate approximately 6% annual return. You'll receive quarterly statements and can access funds for child-related expenses at any time. The principal remains untouched until the beneficiary reaches 25. Who established the trust? I'm not at liberty to disclose that information. The paperwork indicates an anonymous donor. However, the trust documents were filed by Rebecca Hahn if you'd like to verify legitimacy." Eva thanked him mechanically and ended the call, then immediately called Rebecca. "Did you file trust documents for my son?" "I did. This morning. The donor wished to remain anonymous but wanted to ensure your child's future was secure regardless of any other circumstances." It was Soren. Had to be Soren. Who else would care about her son's education and medical care and welfare? Who else would think 25 years ahead? Who else would give without demanding recognition? Her hands trembled holding the phone. "Can I refuse it?" "You could, though I'd advise against it. The trust is ironclad, established with clear provisions that protect your autonomy. You can't be forced to use it, but your son will benefit regardless of your choices. It's a gift with no strings attached." Rebecca paused, then added quietly, "Some gifts are meant to be accepted, Ms. Thorne. Not because you need saving, but because someone wants you to have options." Eva thanked her and hung up, then sat in the nursery staring at the crib, trying to reconcile the man she'd run from with the man who'd just ensured her son's future without asking for anything in return. This was the difference, she realized. The fundamental distinction she'd been too young and too frightened to see 5 years ago. Control demanded compliance. Protection offered freedom. Dashiell had controlled her through money and isolation and systematic destruction of her self-worth, had wielded his resources as weapons designed to make her dependent, diminished, desperate. Soren protected her through distance and resources and respect for her autonomy, had wielded his power to remove threats and create options and ensure she could choose her own path. One man had caged her with comfort, the other had freed her with consequence. The dissolution became final on a Tuesday afternoon. Paperwork arriving via courier with Rebecca Hahn's compliments and a handwritten note. "You are legally free. Build something beautiful." Eva held the document, official stamp and judge's signature declaring her marriage to Dashiell Copeland dissolved, and felt nothing but quiet closure. No grief for what ended, no regret for time lost. Just acceptance that some chapters close and new ones begin and you can't move forward while dragging the past behind you. She was 27 weeks pregnant now, entering the 3rd trimester with a clean slate and in a future that belonged entirely to her. Dr. Whitmore had pronounced everything perfect at her last appointment, baby measuring right on schedule, Eva's vitals excellent, no complications on the horizon. That evening, Eva did something she'd been avoiding. She pulled out a notebook and began writing a letter to her son, words she'd give him someday when he was old enough to understand. "Dear Ethan," she began, though she hadn't yet told anyone the name she'd chosen. "You don't know your father, and that's okay. Some absences are gifts, but there's someone else you should know about, even though you'll probably never meet him." She wrote about Soren without using his name, about protection without possession, about the rarest kind of strength being the courage to set someone free. She wrote about dragons and shadows and men who ruled quietly from distances that allowed choice. She wrote until her hand cramped and tears blurred the ink, until every truth she'd learned in the past month had been distilled onto pages her son could read when the time came. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope marked, "For Ethan, age 18. Then she tucked it into the back of the nursery drawer, a truth preserved for the future. The next morning brought another shift. Eva woke feeling different, her body heavy in new ways, her son's movements more urgent. She called Dr. Whitmore, who confirmed she'd entered a new phase, the final stretch before birth, when preparation became anticipation. "You're doing beautifully, Ms. Thorne. Everything is exactly as it should be. Have you thought about who'll be with you during delivery?" Helen from 4C volunteered, and Rebecca said she'd be available if needed. "Both good options. You'll do fine. You're stronger than you think." Eva heard the echo of Soren's note, "You were always stronger than you believed," and wondered if strength was something you possessed or something you grew into through necessity and choice. Maybe both. Maybe strength was latent potential activated by circumstance, by being pushed hard enough that you either broke or discovered you could bend much further than anticipated. She'd bent. Dashiell had tried to break her, and Soren had given her space to bend instead, to flex and adapt and emerge, changed but intact. June arrived with heat that made her ankles swell and her back ache. She spent mornings in the apartment's small courtyard reading in the shade while other residents tended container gardens and exchanged pleasantries. The building had become a cocoon of sorts, a buffer between her and the chaos she'd left behind. News about Dashiell faded from headlines as new scandals emerged. His trial was scheduled for September, but Eva had already told Rebecca she wouldn't testify unless absolutely necessary. The evidence spoke for itself, the recordings, the financial records, the documented pattern of abuse and control. "Let him face consequences without making me relive the trauma," she'd said, and Rebecca had agreed immediately. One afternoon in late June, Eva received a package. No return address, just her name and apartment number in familiar, precise handwriting. Inside was a single item, a silver necklace with a small dragon pendant, delicate and beautiful. The dragon's body curved protectively around a tiny pearl. The note inside was brief. "For your son. When he's old enough, tell him dragons protect but never cage. He'll understand when the time comes." No signature, but Eva pressed the necklace to her chest and cried anyway, understanding this was goodbye. Soren had done everything he'd set out to do, ensured her safety, provided resources, removed the threat, established a future for her child. Now he was stepping back completely, giving her the space to build a life without his shadow. She placed the necklace in the envelope with the letter, another piece of truth preserved for Ethan's future. July arrived and brought with it the final countdown. Eva was 36 weeks pregnant now, her body preparing for the monumental work of bringing life into the world. Dr. Whitmore scheduled weekly appointments, monitoring progress and readiness. "Your body knows what to do," she reassured Eva during each visit. "Trust the process. Trust yourself." Helen helped Eva pack a hospital bag, triple-checking supplies and adding items Eva hadn't thought of. Snacks for after delivery, comfortable socks, a going-home outfit for the baby that Helen had knitted herself. "You're going to be an amazing mother," Helen said one evening over tea. "I can tell. You've got that fierce, protective energy. Your boy is lucky." Eva's eyes filled with tears, pregnancy hormones and gratitude and the simple kindness of being seen. July 12th arrived with oppressive heat and a feeling Eva couldn't name. She woke at 3 a.m. to wetness between her legs and a tightening across her belly that took her breath away. Her water had broken. She called Helen first, then Dr. Whitmore, then grabbed her hospital bag with shaking hands. This was happening. After months of preparation and anticipation and fear and hope, her son was coming. Helen drove her to St. Catherine's, calm and steady despite the early hour, talking Eva through contractions that were already coming regular and strong. "Breathe through it. That's it. You're doing great. Almost there." Dr. Whitmore met them in labor and delivery, already gowned and ready, her presence a reassuring constant as pain built and crested and built again. Labor lasted 14 hours. Eva had read the books, attended the classes, thought she understood what to expect. Nothing prepared her for the actual experience, the way pain redefined itself hourly, the exhaustion that made coherent thought impossible. The animal certainty that her body knew what to do even when her mind wanted to surrender. Helen stayed the entire time, offering ice chips and encouraging words and a steady hand to squeeze when contractions peaked. Dr. Whitmore monitored progress with quiet competence, explaining each stage and what came next. "You're in transition now, Ms. Thorne. The hardest part, but it means you're almost there. Your body is doing exactly what it should." Eva wanted to argue that her body was tearing apart, that this was impossible, that she couldn't do this. But then another contraction hit and she bore down because what choice did she have? "Push, Ms. Thorne. One more push. You're almost there." Dr. Whitmore's voice cut through the fog and Eva pushed, screaming with effort, her entire existence narrowing to this single moment of bringing life into the world. And then he was here, squalling and red-faced and perfect, placed on her chest, still slick from birth, his tiny fists waving at nothing, his eyes squeezed shut against sudden brightness. Eva cried great heaving sobs of relief and joy and overwhelming love for this person she'd just met, but already knew more intimately than anyone else. Her son, her boy, hers. "What's his name?" the nurse asked gently while checking vital signs, and Eva said the name she'd chosen weeks ago. "Ethan. Ethan Thorne. It meant strong, firm, enduring, all the things she wanted for him, all the qualities she'd been building in herself. A name without ownership or expectation, just hope and love and the promise of possibility. Helen squeezed her hand, tears streaming down her own face. Perfect. He's absolutely perfect. Dr. Whitmore completed her examination and pronounced both mother and baby healthy. You did beautifully, Ms. Thorne. Textbook delivery. Your son is strong and alert and exactly where he should be developmentally. You should be very proud. Eva could barely hear her over the sound of Ethan's cries softening as he found her breast and began to nurse, his tiny mouth working instinctively, his fingers curling around her thumb with surprising strength. This, she thought, this is what real power feels like. Not domination or control or the ability to destroy enemies. Real power is creating life and choosing how to protect it and having the strength to build something beautiful from nothing. They stayed in the hospital 2 days, Eva learning the rhythms of new motherhood while Helen brought supplies and Rebecca stopped by with legal documents establishing Ethan's identity. Birth certificate listing only Eva as parent, social security application. All the paperwork that made him real in the eyes of the world. No father listed, Rebecca confirmed. Clean slate. Your choice entirely how much to share with him as he grows. On the 3rd day, Eva bundled Ethan into the car seat Helen had installed in her own vehicle and rode home to Riverside Drive, her son sleeping peacefully while Los Angeles traffic hummed around them. The apartment felt different with Ethan in it, fuller, more purposeful, charged with new energy. Eva placed his car seat on the floor and just stared at him for long minutes, marveling that this person existed, that she'd created him, that he was hers to protect and nurture and guide. That evening, as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, Eva stood by the nursery window holding Ethan against her chest. She looked out at the city sprawling below and thought about Soren somewhere in this vast landscape, going about his business, living his life, probably unaware that his gift had arrived safely into the world. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to the number that had gone silent weeks ago. Ethan Thorne, born July 12th, 7:43 p.m., 7 pounds 8 ounces, healthy, perfect. Thank you for everything, for protecting us, for respecting my choices, for showing me what real strength looks like. She hesitated, then added one final line. Dragons protect but never cage. I'll make sure he knows. The message sent. She didn't expect a response and didn't receive one. But 3 days later, a courier arrived with a small package. Inside was a children's book, a story about a dragon who watched over a village from the mountains, protecting from shadows but never interfering, letting the people below live their lives freely while ensuring no harm befell them. The inscription on the first page read, "For Ethan, may he always know the difference between strength and cruelty." A friend. Eva read the story to Ethan that night, even though he was too young to understand, her voice soft in the darkened nursery, her son's breathing steady against her chest. When she finished, she placed the book on the shelf next to the letter and the necklace, building a collection of truths her son would discover when the time came. And outside in the Los Angeles night, life continued. Dashiell Copeland awaited trial in federal custody. Soren Cade conducted business from his downtown office. The world turned on its axis, indifferent to the small miracle of one woman and one baby building a life from ashes and choices and the courage to start again. Eva Thorne stood at her window holding her son, looking out at the city lights and smiled. She was free, she was strong, she was enough. And Ethan would grow up knowing that the rarest gift you could give someone was not protection or provision or even love, but the freedom to choose their own path and the courage to walk it alone. Some kings rule from thrones, she whispered to her sleeping son, others from shadows, and the rarest ones they rule by letting go.